Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the November 3rd regular meeting of Parksville Council. The City of Parksville recognizes the people of the Coast Salish Nations and their traditional territory upon which we gather with gratitude. We have almost full council here. We have Councillor Gar appearing via Zoom. Councillor Gar, could you give me a sound check, please?
Yes, good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Can you hear me?
Barely. If you can maybe lean into it or bring your microphone closer, if you could, Councillor Gore, that would be helpful. And
hello, Mayor and Council. Can you hear me now?
Okay, that's better, sir. Thank you very much. Council, up front, we have our consent agenda for the minutes of the council meeting held October 20th, 2025, and the approval of the council meeting agenda for today. Do I have a mover seconder for the recommendations? Moved by Councillor Wood, seconded by Councillor Martin. Any errors or omissions or further discussion? All those in favor? That carries. Thank you. The first report we have on the agenda is from myself, Mayor O'Brien, for the 2026 council appointments, to review and renew council appointments to committees, boards, and liaison positions, which we do at this time of year. You see the attachment in your package. Do I have a mover or seconder for the recommendation that the report from Mayor O'Brien dated October 22nd, 2025, entitled 2026 Council Appointments be received? Part 2, the council endorsed the council appointments attached as Schedule A to this report. I have a mover, moved by Councillor Wood, second by Councillor Martin. Any discussion? Councillor Grants.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and good afternoon. I did want to add to the discussion on this one the possibility of, I did get a request to have a liaison for the Parksville Community Center Society, and thought I'd put that forward for discussion to see if we would want to appoint a liaison to that role.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Granson. Thanks for the heads up on this, on thinking on this further. Since we have the appointments already made for here, can we put it, I want to have a discussion about it as well, but could we, with the idea of putting it off for the, since we've already have the list already made for this year, can we put it off to the new council in 2026? We can put a place marker in place for the first meeting agenda for the new to consider an additional liaison position, but it'd be difficult to do it right at this stage because we basically have 10 months to go. And when my meetings with the staff anyways previous, we just deleted the ones that were no longer valid, like the Oceanside Services Track Committee and so forth. Would that meet with your approval?
Yeah, I have no specific, I'd love to discuss it, but it doesn't need to be today. I did want to bring that forward though, because that was requested.
Right. Yes. So well, we could discuss it now and maybe have a vote on bringing it forward and pushing it forward as a placeholder for 2026. Would that work for you?
I'm happy to support that. I'm happy to discuss it now. Either way, it's fine by me. But if the timing isn't great right now, well, we could definitely do a motion to defer it to the next council is another option for sure.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's do it because we're open for discussion right now. Let's do it right now, and we can talk about it. And if you could just describe your points on with the meetings you've had with and what that would entail. Go ahead.
Sure.
Councillor Grants.
Okay. Thank you. So through you to council, I did have a brief chat with Dwayne following our meeting where he came and presented last meeting, and he mentioned that it would be nice to have someone from council as a liaison. They have regular meetings as a society, and for them to have someone from council representing, just building that connection, he thought that would be helpful as a way to, especially as they're moving forward with potentially acquiring that building.
Right. Sure. Any other comments on this? Councillor Gore, did you have your hand up? Go ahead.
Well, thank you, Mayor. No, I appreciate Councillor Grants bringing it forward. I was hoping that would be more like a notice of motion rather than having this discussion at this time. We all recognize the important work that PCCS do, and I think there will be multiple people who would be interested in being that liaison, including myself. So it would have been appropriate, or might be appropriate, for us to have the conversations like we usually do for other liaison positions, where the mayor would ask who's interested, and he won't who who might be an appropriate candidate for those positions. So I appreciate the thought, and I think the request is quite appropriate from PCCS, but I'm not sure, like, at this very juncture, like, for me, it's news. I had no idea that such a meeting happened, for us to be appointing liaison at this time. I agree with the thought of this, but yeah, perhaps next council might be the better option to go.
Yes, and thank you for that, Councilor Gore, and agreed. It's not just a matter of picking who would be actually chosen to be the liaison position. It's a question of, do we need a liaison position with the PCC Society? So that question would, that discussion would have to happen, and which would also involve like a staff report. What are the implications of this? You know, to add a liaison, a new liaison position. What does that come with? And that's what would have to have, and it would be more appropriate in my mind, since we're wrapping up our term, that would be a great discussion for the new council when elected to be on. Well, as you know, the meetings, one of the first or second meetings after the inauguration is discussing appointments for liaison positions. So we could have that discussion for the next council. For the 2026. I think that would be the best. And then we'll have all the information of that. And who knows, maybe there may be other associations that want to be considered for having a liaison position as well, which would be considered by the new council. It could possibly be. Go ahead, Councillor Barton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My thought is that I think when you have a recommendation from a council that's already functioning like our council, if it came forward to a new council, they wouldn't know the reasons why. I think if it was recommended that it be done by our council for the next term, that'd be a good idea. But to leave it up to the new council and they don't really realize what's involved with the liaison, it's very important. So if we made a recommendation like Councillor Grenz suggested, I think it's a good idea, but to recommend it for the next council to be brought forward. You understand what I'm saying?
I
From
do.
this council to recommend it for the next council.
Yeah, I do, but I don't like really putting our recommendation through for a brand new council that may have a totally different direction that they want to go in. And I think it's more fair that they make that decision anyways, that mayor and council make that decision together. Yeah. So, you know, it's nice to have a recommendation, but at the same time, it's also more appropriate that they maybe make those decisions for themselves. Their first big decision they get to make, right? Yeah.
It's okay. Thank you. It's just my thought. That's all.
I just my thoughts. I think, you know, leading into it, going into a council, I'd rather be making that decision for ourselves anyways, with the mayor and council having discussions on what that looks like. Yeah, I think it's a good one. Councillor Beal, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I would like to thank Councillor Grenz for bringing this forward, this notion. I really appreciate it. I do have a question around process. Is there, with the council appointments coming forward right now, is it imperative that any decisions about the 2026 year appointments be in place by a certain date? Or could it be possible for this to be considered right now and perhaps, for instance, follow up at the next council meeting? So that's a question that I have. Is there a critical deadline here, or is this something that can be introduced at a different time or added to?
CEO Kaler, if you could direct that, please.
Thank you. Through you to council, there are deadlines for some of the appointments that are being discussed today, specifically the library and the RDN appointments. There's no obligation or requirement statutorily to have the other liaison appointments. The AWS and ERWS, RDN and library are the only required ones.
Right. Follow up, Councillor Beal.
Okay, thank you very much. I thought and hoped that that might be the case. I do think that although it may feel like we're coming up to the end of our term, I believe it's almost 12 months still. So I don't see that as a really, really short period of time. And I think that there is some merit in considering this sooner, given our understanding from the presentation by the PCC Society that they are hoping to and are working towards a possible purchase of that property and continuing the work that they do in the community, and that they have a 2-year window basically to do that. So I think that's a fairly short period of time. I'm wondering, if I may, through to Councillor Grenz, I'm wondering if Councillor Grenz might be open to us deferring this to the next council meeting so that people have additional time to consider this?
Yes, or alternately, what happens, CAO Kaler, if we pass this one exactly as listed in the agenda today, and with the thought of receiving a notice of motion from Councillor Grenz or Councillor Beal to bring this up at the next, to add on to it? Is there any harm in adding on to it after this list has been approved?
No.
That's okay?
Yeah.
Okay. That's what I would suggest do. That way we meet all the terms of getting this done in time with our council meetings coming up. And then, so I would first ask then for a discussion or a vote on the existing list that we have today in front of you. Any further discussion before I call the question? All those in favor? Thank you. That passes unanimous. Councillor Grenz, would you like to introduce a motion now or notice of motion, or wait till the end of the meeting and introduce your notice of motion then to have this considered at a later council meeting with perhaps a staff report attached to what the implications that would be?
Yeah, I think during the notice of motion section, we can just flag that. And I think we already sort of discussed it. So I think we're good there. Thank you.
Okay, you're okay with that? Okay, that's great. Councillor Fraz, go ahead, sir.
Just a question here. I know it's been gonna bring up as a notice motion next meeting, but we don't need a staff report attached to it, do we? Like, I don't see this taking any work, just giving us some time for consideration on it. If we're just gonna put it to the next meeting, just gives us a little bit more chance to consider what we're doing there. And I'll just mention though, I think that the fact that they've asked for a liaison position and to build that relationship, I think is worthy of a consideration there. And with a year before the next election, you know, it's going to be going through the summer months and there'll be a lot of activities in that. I think there could be benefit of having someone there. So those are the kind of things I'll be considering before our next meeting.
Perfect. Okay, that's good. Remind me at notices of motion if I don't remember. Long time away. Thank you. Okay, that's great. We're good. Next on the agenda, we have the report regarding the Emergency Program Coordinator, November 2025 UBCM Community Emergency Preparedness Fund Emergency Support Services Grant Application. You saw the request for the grant application, Council. Do I have a mover, seconder for the recommendation? Moved by Councillor Grenz, seconded by Councillor Beal. Any discussion? All those in favor? Thank you. That carries. Mrs. Holmes, would you please provide a presentation regarding the infrastructure report card to provide council with information regarding critical infrastructure classes at this time? Welcome, Mrs. Holmes. Pretty sure you know how to operate that microphone. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. This is going to be a week. You're going to see a lot of me. So there's 2 reports in your agenda that have a lot in them. So I'm hoping that today we can walk through this PowerPoint. Certainly feel free to ask questions. It's not something that we necessarily need a decision on today. It'll be something that we bring forward back to our financial plan kind of decision items. And so today is about providing some more context, hopefully some more explanation, because I know that there's a lot to all of this with the infrastructure replacement and the funding related to that. So we'll walk through those reports again, certainly jump in at any time. So the first report that's on your agenda is the one that has the infrastructure report cards. And so that provides a lot of detail about those 5 asset classes. The second report is looking at the sustainable long-term funding related to the renewal of those assets. And that follows a resolution of council during our 25 to 29 financial planning process. And so it's taking us kind of the next stage of peeling the onion that is our asset management program and trying to bring you some more information about the magnitude of that, as well as how we might get to a point of providing some of that funding in the long term. Just a bit of background on this, just to make sure we're all on the same page. We started with an asset management strategy that was adopted by council at the beginning of your term. And then we updated our asset management policy that was already in place. From that, the management strategy and the policy kind of gave direction to staff to build out asset management plans for all of our significant assets. The next step in that really is to look at the funding of those asset management plans. And our work in this as a staff group has been moving a lot of things forward at once rather than taking one asset class and taking it right to the finish line, because I think it helps to kind of get some breadth across our assets and have an understanding of what these plans might look like, as well as understanding the funding. And as we've talked about in the past, the sooner we can get started on looking at some of the funding solutions, I think the better the community is in the very long run. And when we have assets that are expected to last 85 to 100 years, it's good to have that long runway in looking at the replacements. I think what our goal for this financial planning cycle is, and again, like I say, peeling the onion a little bit, is maybe for council to give direction on a range of years during which we'll progress to a point of sustainable funding, or a point at which the infrastructure deficit is reduced by some amount. So I don't expect in any way that as of this year, we're going to be solved and all of this is going to be done, but I really think it's a way to look ahead. For example, Comox has decided that they've got a 10-year vision to kind of deal with a lot of the funding and the infrastructure deficit. So that's an example of another municipality that's decided to do it over the range of perhaps 3 different councils. So it's certainly not something that I think anyone expects one council to solve all of this. I think one of the things that we should be very proud of is all of the pieces that we've put into place to build this asset management foundation. And a lot of that has been approved and moved forward by this council. And so just to make sure we're all, again, on the same page on this, that top part of it, the sustainable infrastructure funding, can't really be brought in unless we have all of these other pieces in place. And so part of that is, again, having that asset management strategy, which is a real guiding document for staff and for future councils to some degree to say, what do we need to accomplish here? The asset management policy provides some more information, but there's also other policy pieces like our reserves policy and our bylaw that need to be in place in order for the sustainable funding to kind of have a vehicle to work with. We did have dedicated asset management staff that's really allowed us to, turn the dial on our whole program. And that was certainly appreciated when council approved that as well. So the other things that have been part of this is the approval of increased funding and incremental funding, such that 0.5% of property taxes increases each year. And then last year, with council approving an additional 0.5 that goes to water and sewer, all of a sudden puts those funds in a different place too, incrementally. The other piece that was really important last year was the indexing of that funding envelope for our kind of current capital investment. Again, a very significant amount that over time really makes a difference. And then, as you know, we've been doing a lot of work on condition assessments of our assets, and that has provided the data that we'll take a look at today. And so all of these are pieces that we need in order to determine, or at least make our best estimates on the sustainable infrastructure funding. We know that this isn't just a problem in Parksville. It's a problem, well, I would suggest all over the world, but Canada suggests that the infrastructure deficit may be as high as 270 billion, and some are even saying 1 trillion. So that works out to really big numbers, however you cut it. And if we look at Parksville's share as a percentage of the population in Canada, we might expect ours to range from 36 to $88 million. The estimate that's in the report today is 81 million. And we'll talk about what's kind of some of the estimates that are included within that and where we might be able to fine tune those more. But I think what we need to do and what we'll see in some of the headlines is that municipalities across Canada are struggling to maintain and replace and build the infrastructure that our growing population needs. And so I guess that's just really to provide context to the conversation today. We're all in it together. So I think we're trying to find solutions. I'll note that FCM had a news release on Thursday talking about exactly this and just what FCM is advocating for. And I know what this council's been advocating for is more senior level government and kind of looking at, you know, municipalities own, it says here 60% of the core infrastructure, yet we receive just 8 to 10 cents of the tax dollars going towards that. So I think FCM is also advocating for all municipalities for some additional funding. And you may want to look at this full news release because it provides some additional information on where FCM is targeting their advocacy. I think what's important though is that we can't wait for this to come. I think that the city of Parksville's got to also take care of the stewardship of its assets and hope that this continues and work with what we have for now in our estimates. As you know, we've had about 5, what I would term master plans done over the last couple of years. We've had all of the linear infrastructure, the sanitary sewer, the water, the storm drainage, as well as a transportation master plan, and then the pavement condition index that was done. That's really given us a lot of data with which to work in terms of trying to estimate what our deficit might be, as well as what we might want for sustainable funding going forward. We'll compare today why our estimates might be different than what was presented in the master plans, but know that the data that they provided is also very useful and we can fine tune that in our own estimates. What I'll note about the transportation master plan is it wasn't just about the roads. And so when we look at the roads class today, the transportation master plan also obviously had much more breadth in terms of looking at active transportation and things of that nature. And so more than the other master plans had more breadth to it. When we look at comparing what the master plans advised for annual sustainable funding as compared to what our report cards that were included with the report suggest, you'll note that in most cases, the report card recommended amount was significantly less in 2 cases than the master plans and significantly more in another. With respect to the sewer and water sustainable funding, those projects are looked at as one-off projects. And so it would include the additional pavement on top when they dig up the pipes and things like that, where what we'll be bringing to council in the spring is a synthesized plan that looks at doing all of those infrastructure projects all at once. So like we did on Moss, where we look at all 4 kind of categories of that infrastructure, do them all at once. And so that we're not paving 3 times, we're doing it all together. And so there's significant efficiencies to doing it that way. And so we look forward to bringing you the 20-year plan that will bring all of those projects together, weighing their different criticality and timing on all of those. With respect to the roads, the pavement condition index recommended 2.8 million annually. Our report card recommends a much higher number. And the reason for the difference in that is multiple. The pavement condition assessment focuses just on the current condition and backlog. It doesn't look at all of the roads going ahead 85 years or whatever we expect our roads to last. The other part of that is they just look at the pavement on top. They don't look at the sidewalks and the street lights and the base and all of the other things that go with the roads. And so we would expect those to be different. However, that said, the pavement condition assessment is still very, very useful in terms of identifying roads that need to be dealt with sooner than later. And we'll talk about that kind of ongoing renewal and maintenance piece and how that can extend the life of these assets. When we get into this year's financial plan, you'll note that there's a lot of things in minor capital that are kind of significant maintenance projects. And what this graph really shows is that over the life of an asset, if we do that proactive kind of intervention maintenance, it will extend the life of the asset. And so we can push out when we have to do a full renewal and incur that full cost. So it's more cost efficient to keep up with the maintenance, and like pavement overlays, for example, mean we don't have to pave the whole road. If we continue with the pavement overlays, we don't have to rebuild the base when it comes time to pave it. Similarly, if we have a building, if we replace the roof at 20 years versus not replacing it, we don't have to replace the whole building for a lot of years. So those are just some examples of how, if we stay on top of that regular maintenance, we can push out the sustainable funding level over a number of years. And, you know, just as an example, if there's an asset that costs $100, if we want it to last 10 years, we're going to have $10 per year of sustainable funding. If we don't do the maintenance and it only lasts 5 years, well, you can imagine that just doubles the amount of sustainable funding, and we're going to have to sooner replace that. So the only way it's a little bit like taxes, either push them out further. If we can push the renewal out further, that's more efficient for us. It gives us more time to save those dollars, or if we have other financial needs, to push those renewals out. So again, we'll highlight this in the financial plan, showing where there are significant maintenance pieces that extend the life of our assets. Looking at the infrastructure report cards, we focused first on these 5 critical asset classes. In our opinion, they impact just about all residents of Parksville. So looking at roads, storm drainage, which is becoming increasingly important with climate change, fire rescue service apparatus, the water, which I'll point out does not include AWS and ERWS assets at this point, and the sanitary sewer. And I think everybody understands why those are critical assets to our residents. So what it's meant to do, each of these report cards, is provide a snapshot of the asset management plan info at that time. And so it's providing things like estimated replacement value, what we think might be sustainable funding, what the gap is, for example, where we're behind in some of our renewal of assets, and kind of some of the details of these assets. These are something that are kind of live documents. They'll be continually updated as we have new information, as we have new estimates. Our asset management specialist keeps track of unit rates. So when we have a new project, we update those unit rates. We attend sessions with other communities and understand what other unit rates people are using in other municipalities, so that we can compare and make sure that our estimates are in line with, say, other Central Island unit rates. For example, we don't want to use the unit rates in Northern BC. They're going to be really different than what we have here. So there's a lot of numbers go into this, and what they're really meant to do is give us an estimate and be a guiding document, and they'll be refined forever. They're never going to be final, but I think it helps to provide council with an order of magnitude on what we might be looking at in terms of the long-term renewal of these assets. We know that there's still work to be done. Parks, facilities, the natural assets, those are still coming and still in progress. And so we'll bring those to council as that information becomes more refined. In your packages is one of these report cards for each of those classes. They're very high level estimates, as I said, so they might be plus or minus 50%, the numbers that are shown there. Again, just trying to provide order of magnitude. They're sensitive to the numbers that are included in the calculations. So the estimated useful life, as we go through each year, we see how long our assets are lasting. Parksville is a relatively young community. And so there's assets that were built in the, say, early 80s that haven't reached the end of their lives. And so as we reach the end of lives of some of these assets, we'll be able to refine our estimates. Right now, we use estimates that are in our TCA policy, as well as the condition assessment work where consultants provided recommendations for estimated useful lives and what's remaining. And so we kind of mix and match with those with the best information we have. As I talked about, we use the unit rates that we're seeing in our own contracts, as well as those in neighboring municipalities. And then there's the contingencies built into these to allow for that factor where we know that they're estimates. As I said, they're dynamic and they change as new estimates become available. So again, we'll refine these over time. We can bring them back to council periodically, and we can advise you of where things changed and how those estimates have changed. This was interesting to me to look at kind of what is our estimated replacement value just for these classes, and not including like the water treatment plant and the dam, is over 1 billion of assets that are being managed by the city staff. So it's a very, very significant investment that's made in order to deliver those services to our residents. And you can see that some of our estimates of lives are 85 years. So it's a very long-term vision where we're looking at making decisions about funding the renewal 85 years from now, when likely none of us will be alive, but looking ahead at the same time. So in terms of an estimate of infrastructure deficit, and this is a term that's been around probably for about 10 years now, where we're trying to estimate what amount of renewal of assets should we have done already if we followed all of the best practices and the actual useful lives were correct and all of those assumptions. You can see that right now the estimate is about $81 million. However, you'll see that the roads number is very high. This is one, there's a lot of roads in terms of kilometers, but it's difficult. This is the one where we maybe have the most refinement to do, because the roads are based on age and we expect them to last a certain amount of time. But depending on their actual usage over time, depending on weather, depending on all kinds of things, those ages can vary significantly, including lasting much longer or lasting less. So this is an area where we'll be drilling down in terms of trying to refine that number. And so I'm not suggesting that that number is correct. Like we said, those estimates may be out by as much as 50% or more. So it's really to provide an order of magnitude where we see, okay, according to those parameters, we think we're behind on our roads infrastructure renewal. Got a couple of illustrations to show you with respect to funding. The first is looking at kind of what would be our planned renewal over the next 100 years. And that's looking at the 5 categories of assets that were included in the report cards. And what would happen to our infrastructure deficit, which is the purple line that grows over time, if we only did the current funding. And so for this illustration is to assume the funding was locked in at the 2025 rates. So you'll see it just continues at the same amount. And you'll see how the infrastructure deficit would grow over time. It's also interesting to note that kind of from 2060 through till 2090 is where we see a real peak in infrastructure renewal. And so probably what that means is that 80 years prior, when the city was being built, there was a lot of roads put in, there was a lot of water and sewer infrastructure. So we're going to end up with this peak in here according to the useful lives as we have them now. However, as we refine this information in terms of how long this infrastructure is lasting, what we hope is that these peaks and valleys will be refined over time, and we'll be able to provide more direction on what actual years we might need to renew those assets. It also helps with respect to investing our reserve funds, and the MFA is coming out with more reserve investments that are of a longer term, because they know that many municipalities are doing this kind of work. So if councils are putting aside monies for this really long-term infrastructure, they're having 10 years and longer infrastructure kind of accounts for investments so that we can maximize our interest revenue and other investment revenue over that time frame. What the next chart shows is basically the same infrastructure renewal, but showing it as the funding is now, and that is with that indexed funding over time. And so the orange line is the funding, and you'll see that at about sometime after 2070, the infrastructure deficit starts to decline. So at the current funding, including the indexing, it would probably take us about 60 years to get to a point where we kind of got square with the infrastructure deficit. So that really goes to show, as compared to the previous one, if you just held it steady, that infrastructure deficit just keeps growing and you would have all kinds of failing of assets. Just the decision last year to index that funding makes a very significant difference on kind of how these graphs look. I think what we don't want, though, is to wait 60 years to catch that up. So what we'll bring to council as part of the financial planning process is some options that might show how we bring that back a little bit further, or different combinations of funding, because it's quite significant just looking at the difference between those two graphs. So the decision even to add the indexing made a very significant impact on that long-term view on the infrastructure funding. Just to get away from the numbers for a minute, here's investment in capital over the last 10 years in Parksville, with the red being the highest dollar amounts. And so you can see there's been significant investments in the community park, in water infrastructure with the ERWS, as well as the wetlands area in terms of trails. And then you'll see a few different kind of infrastructure projects like Moss Avenue and some other linear infrastructure replacements. Over the last 10 years, there's been about $77 million invested in capital assets, with the most significant of those being the water treatment plant and the transmission mains that came with that. The community park, about 23% in infrastructure renewal. So that would be about 30% of the total, where we've renewed infrastructure that was already in place. 8.3 million in buildings and building improvements, and a lot of that is new. For example, the performance venue in the community park, the fire department training facility, and then some land purchases as well. So I think it really comes down to a really difficult question that every municipality is facing, and that is, how do we fund the renewal and replacement of the assets that we're currently using to deliver service? And so council has asked us to look at this, to bring you some alternatives. And so today is really to introduce that, to go through at a high level what that might look like, and then we'll bring you some actual kind of recommendations as part of the council decision items for the financial plan. The best practices around this long-term infrastructure funding really are three-part. The one is to determine and commit to a sustainable asset renewal funding level. So as we've noted already, determining what that amount is maybe the most difficult part, because there's a lot of estimates. But I think that councils, what we're seeing is they're committing to a program and saying, we're going to do this over 10 years, or we're going to do it over some time frame, so that there is a plan. And I think that's a big part of it. And then we refine the amounts over time as well. The second part, of course, is identifying how that will be funded. Where will the money come from to fund the funding level that's been committed to? And then the third part is to establish dedicated reserves by bylaw to accumulate that funding for the future renewal. And we've had these conversations in the past where we can't just leave it in the big pot of accumulated surplus, because there isn't any rigor around that. It puts a lot of trust in every subsequent council and staff member to remember, oh yeah, 10 million of that was for this road or whatever. So it's important that these reserves are established and are restricted to some degree, so that the money is set aside and in the locked cabinet, for lack of a better word, to say, nope, that's for the long-term infrastructure renewal. What I'm happy to say is we have one of these done. So great that that's part of our foundation already. To look at some of the numbers around this, we looked at the replacement value being over $1 billion. That's over that kind of life cycle if we were to replace all of the assets in that period, or in those groups. If we look at what amount would we replace within 50 years, you can see that the number is lower. And of course, that makes sense, because there may be assets in there that are 85-year assets that aren't in the 50-year renewal. But if you looked at 100 years, we would probably have maybe 2 renewals of some assets. So these amounts will be different, but council could look at what time frame you want to look at providing the sustainable funding for. two scenarios, for example, and there could be any number of scenarios, but just looking at a couple here is to look at what about for the total life cycle of the assets in question? So to replace all of those assets we have once. So whether their life cycle is 20 years or 85 years, that's what it would cost if we wanted to fund and put aside an amount per year for all of those assets. If we were only looking at 50 years, it would only be 15 million. For total life cycle, it would be 18 million. Obviously, we don't have a crystal ball that's going to tell us how long our assets are going to last. So again, I want to reiterate, these are high-level estimates and really meant to provide kind of order of magnitude type things. This also assumes that the service level is maintained, and council, of course, has direction on changing that as well. So that's always one of the variables that could be changed at any time. Current contributions that are being made to reserves. Right now, we have the capital funding envelope, or that sustainable infrastructure funding, and it is indexed by a construction index, which is about 5% right now. And it gets contributed to our infrastructure renewal reserve. And so that reserve restricts it that it can only be used for renewal of infrastructure assets. We've also been for about 4 years now contributing a percentage of property taxes, was 0.5% for a number of years, is now at 1% to include all three operating funds. Gets contributed to the capital reserve. It has been designated for infrastructure, but it isn't restricted specifically by council for that. We could choose to do that with direction from you, but right now, it's given council some flexibility on what it could be used for. And so we have those two capital reserves in place, and these are the contributions that are being made. These are the 2025 amounts, and you can see that it totals to about 5.3 million, which is kind of our automatic contributions to reserves before we consider additional contributions that might come from the operating surplus allocations that we do at the end of each year, and that may also go to capital reserves. So what that shows us then is that the funding gap between what it might be for our annual sustainable funding for a life cycle of these assets as compared to what we're currently restricted for is about $13 million difference. So that's annually what, if the math were all right and we had a crystal ball, that's the amount we would want to put in every year to fund a life cycle of all of our assets. Clearly, that's not a reasonable amount to look at, but for illustration purposes, this is kind of the analysis that would go into determining this. So the next part is really, put your philosopher's hat on, is who should pay for this? And I know that we would have a lot of residents that would say, I paid for the infrastructure when it went in 1980. I don't want to pay for it again, right? And there's some fairness to that. And so I think it's at council's direction that we get some input on kind of what proportion of the capital costs should be paid by various generations. And it's that term of generational equity that often is a bit of a stumbling block amongst residents who have already invested in assets. However, we have perhaps a whole bunch of residents now that are using these assets all the time and haven't actually paid for those assets. And so we've talked in the past about the reserve contributions being somewhat of a proxy of the usage. So everybody's property taxes go towards that. Unfortunately, most municipalities' past practice has left an infrastructure deficit that needs to be addressed somehow. And so it provides councils of today with significant funding challenges. And there's just no other way to state that because it is difficult because of what past practice has been. I think the best practice is that as soon as you replace an asset, you start saving for its ultimate replacement. And council's made several decisions in recent years to do exactly that, where we're now putting money aside. So certainly that's a good kind of start on those. But at the end of the day, it's elected officials that will provide the guidance, the policy, the direction to determine how we do distribute that to current and future generations. Some municipalities kind of vary that depending on the nature of the asset. So maybe renewal of current assets is funded with reserve contributions by all residents. Maybe new assets, though, are funded by debt or with grants if they're available, or by current ratepayer fees, developer contributions where that's eligible, so that there's consideration given to what can current taxpayers afford. Because I think as much as older generations may say, we already paid for it, newer generations are saying, we can't pay for it all either. So this is the difficult decision for council, of course. In the report, there was an appendix to the report that identified a number of different ways it could be funded, some of the pros and cons of each of them and where they might be applicable. I'm not going to go through these in detail. I think everyone understands what these might be and what are known sources versus what may come up. So for example, grants are great if they're available. They're getting more and more competitive, so we can't always be guaranteed that we would get them. And so if the road needs to be repaved or the pipe needs to be replaced, maybe we can't always rely on a grant because it just might not be available. Similarly, we can't increase property tax fees in 1 year by 40%, as we've seen some in municipalities. I think we want to avoid kind of what I would call those catastrophic financing decisions. And so maybe there's a balance and there's a mix of options in terms of the funding sources. One more comment on this, and that's with respect to long-term debt. Parksville historically has had very little long-term debt. Debt was used for the water treatment plant as well as some improvements in the resort area, which is now complete and behind us. The amount of long-term debt is set at a maximum by the province based on our revenue and our ability to service that debt. And so it's not something that can be used for every project, but it's maybe something that could be used for the very significant projects to allow for management of the renewal, and maybe some of the more significant projects like a water treatment plant or perhaps an RCMP detachment building or something like that, where the amounts are not really manageable within our reserves. Maybe that's where the long-term debt is possible. But for council's information, our maximum debt capacity for the city is about $120 million, which seems like a really large number. But I know that the RCMP detachment in Duncan was about $50 million. So yes, but no at the same time. And we know that at the end of the day, the debt has to be repaid. And so if we were to, for example, borrow $10 million, the annual repayment on that is $800,000, which would need to come out of property taxes or rates, water, utility rates. And so, you know, for example, that's about a 4% property tax increase just to service that debt. So it has its place for sure. And certainly my recommendation would be to use it for the really big things, but it also is something that's there. And fortunately, Parksville is nowhere near its limit. And so it is always on the table if need be. This just summarizes where our capital reserve balances are for these restricted capital reserves to the end of 2025. So a total of about $17 million. So we've made some significant accumulation over the last few years. Part of that has been we've been doing a lot of work on our asset management plans and not so much on infrastructure projects. So what council will see in the upcoming financial plan is some pretty big projects that are going to spend most of this. And as we noted in the chart, sometimes we need to save up for those years where we have big projects. So we'll have lower years of spending to accumulate those funds for the couple of years for significant projects. And so we'll bring these balances forward to show how these will be used in the upcoming 5-year financial plan. So in terms of suggestions to you in the analysis that I'd like to bring back to you as part of the decision items for this year's financial plan is looking at what the impact would be to property taxes and utility rates if we assumed all renewal would come from capital reserve. And again, we're just looking at renewal. We're not looking at new assets. And so if council fully adopted a sustainable funding model, and what would that impact be, say, over 10 years? How would we get to that? So bringing you that as an example, what would it look like if we saved for 75% of the capital reserve and then plan to use grants or other funding that was available at the time? What does that look like in terms of impact over some amount of time? What I think is important is that at times we can use DCCs where there may be an improvement to the road, but in terms of just renewal of the same for same, DCCs wouldn't be eligible for that. So again, as the city is more and more developed and there isn't as much developable land, that DCC piece is probably less than it has been in the past. And then looking at the option of 50% capital reserves and relying on 50% of debt or other funding, keeping in mind that that debt piece will reach its maximum, and we may wish to not do the debt for renewal, but save it for the very large, perhaps council gives direct, if it's over $10 million, we'll consider debt or some sort of guideline like that. City of Nanaimo uses guidelines like that, where there's certain thresholds at which debt is used instead of their own reserves. I would welcome any other suggestions or requests from council. If there's other scenarios you would like us to analyze for you and bring back, knowing that this isn't a one-year decision, this is something that will be revisited over time. And also weighing, of course, and we'll talk about this on Wednesday, where are we at in our world economy and Canada's economy and the island economy, and what can our residents afford? And certainly that is the lens that we have to look through all of this with, and consider the impacts over time of trying to set up a sustainable funding program. I'll finish off, and then if there's questions about this or further requests, I'd be happy to take that. What I do want to do is acknowledge our asset management specialist, Mike Denton, who's really brought us a huge way in 3 years that he's been here. Unfortunately, he's going to be leaving the city's employment, and we're very sorry about that, but really want to give a lot of gratitude to him for moving the dial on this program to get us to a point where we actually have numbers that we can bring. And as much as they're high level and all of the rest, to get to a point here where we're able to bring that level of data analysis to you, I think is real kudos to him and leading our internal asset management teams as well. We have a smaller group that is mostly finance and engineering, but as well as a citywide group. So it's really becoming a part of our operation throughout the city, is keeping the asset management and the life cycle of assets in context for financial planning, for operations, for that ongoing maintenance. So just really want to give a shout out to Mike before he leaves in a month, and we'll be sorry to see him go, but certainly wish him the very best in his future endeavors. Happy to take any questions on any of this.
Great, thank you very much. And Mike, we're going to miss you. And thank you for your service. You've done an amazing job in the short 3 years that you've been here. Very efficient. Wish you all the best in your new endeavors. But thank you for your service to the city of Parksville. Much appreciated. Before I open up to council here, one of your last slides here, Jetta, referred to our neighbors to the south of us at the city of Nanaimo, supporting a lot of their infrastructure rebuild. Anyways, you were saying that is relying heavily on debt, borrowing and so forth. And that seemed to be it as compared to using capital reserves. And I like to look at what they're doing because their costs for their infrastructure are going to be similar to us. We're both on an island and we're pretty close. And so although our pipes may be a little bit smaller, but they're still pipes nonetheless. And so the percentage of increases that they have are just your rough estimation, because I know too that City of Nanaimo is going right now very aggressive infrastructure renew on a couple of very major projects that are happening with them, and they've completed some other ones already. So is their debt picture looking really frightening right now, or did they I also understand that their budget is considerably different than ours, but at the same time those projects are huge and they're not letting up. They're what they have to, with their pending growth that they have going on too. So can you just comment on we're not like that, we're similar, but don't worry about it.
Yeah, thanks for that question. I'm not completely familiar with it, but I tried to read other municipalities' kind of sustainable funding documents, their infrastructure replacement, asset management documents. And what I noted with Nanaimo is that they tend to use debt on the very significant projects, not on their just everyday renewal. So they look for those large projects, and that's where they dedicate their debt, because I think they do have a pretty significant debt load. That said, whenever we use debt, we have to go to the electors if it's of a significant amount. And so, as you know, Nanaimo has struggled to rebuild their kind of public works operations yard because they haven't been able to get that approval from the residents. And so they're struggling with that. But yes, one of the things that Mike has done, which has been very, very helpful, when we get those types of documents from other municipalities, we've referenced Colwood recently, is we'll kind of look at it as a proportion population wise, kilometers of pipes wise to see, okay, are we in the ballpark as compared to them? So we even do that with City of Nanaimo, recognizing that we're a proportion of their size. But in theory, you know, we're a similar operation, we have similar assets, you know, are we in the ballpark? So that helps us to kind of gauge our estimates. Are we way out? And if we are, maybe we need to go back to the drawing board. But yeah, sometimes they're quite comparable. And so we have done that with Nanaimo and feel like we're in a similar ballpark to them. But it is interesting to see how different municipalities approach the use of debt. Some use it a lot and max out and have very little left in terms of wiggle room if something catastrophic happens. So it's a difficult balancing act for sure. Yeah, but it is a philosophical thing. What I noted about Colwood recently is their council has given them some guidance that when they use debt for a project, the payments are made at the end of the life of the debt, they continue those payments and they just go into reserve. So those residents continue to have that smooth kind of cash flow in terms of the property taxes, avoiding the peaks and valleys that I think every finance officer wants to avoid. But that's been kind of their guidance, is to continue with that payment amount just goes into reserves. So that's also a very good way, especially for those very significant projects, to be saving up for the future renewal of those, just as an example.
So in the case of Parksville, like the debt load that we're carrying on Resort Drive and also on the water treatment plant, you're suggesting those little payments continue to be made. How Colwood is, we've already taxed for that. And so we just continue on, even though we paid that debt, and we're now taking that and putting it into reserve. So is that reserve for that particular infrastructure, or is that going to go into just reserves period?
I think it could be done either way.
Right.
I think mostly it just goes into the general reserve because, as you can imagine, over time, with communities that have strong reserves, one, you can borrow from your own reserves if you have peaks in your replacement, knowing that you're sustainable over time.
Nice.
So that's a huge benefit because then you're not subject to whatever rates the interest is at a time. And then the other part of it is that, yes, for us, this year is the first year we wouldn't be making the debt payments on Resort Drive. So that is something that we could do. The water treatment plant, we've got another 14 years, I think, or something like that. And so that decision is a little ways out, but it's certainly, I think, a great way to do that because the cash flow is the same and you don't get those peaks and valleys of, okay, those debt payments are done, we're swimming, right? And I think it really helps. But again, I like those kind of larger reserves that are restricted to infrastructure because then you can manage the peaks and valleys over time and not be restricted to one pot for each project.
Thank you for that. And then my only question that always concerns me is that we can do all the analysis and have all the recommendations and so forth, which you're very wisely providing us now. What's to prevent a following council actually from taking all of our good methods, like as you say, when like just in Resort Drive, let's just take that because that's easy. To say, well, we don't want to continue doing that type of thing, and we're planning for the 20 or 40 year renew on a project. I mean, can it all be undone?
Well, I guess the short answer is yes. I mean, we're seeing lots of that south of the border. That is one upside of the restricted reserves, right? So the amount that is in a restricted capital reserve could only be used for the terms of that. But yes, it could all be unraveled with another council's decisions with respect to moving forward, right? You could direct that the financial plan doesn't include those sustainable funding amounts and contributions to reserves and all kinds of things. So absolutely right on that. All you can do is put in what you would like to see as policy or bylaws or direction on that. And as staff, we would continue to make the same recommendations, but ultimately it's council's decision on the financial plan, on the service level, on all of those things. So, yeah.
Because of course, coming into an election year, we recognize politically, the right thing to do is exactly as our Director of Finance has recommended here. That's the absolutely right thing to do. I know that because you know what you're talking about. But at the same time, if within and other areas where we have incoming announcements of new council members, mayors and so forth, they're suggesting that they're going to run on a platform of zero increase, actually reduction of taxes. And so who is going to get elected? The ones that are actually being creating a platform that's sustainable, or one that's just going to get them elected. And that's what's alarming to myself. And like, in areas in British Columbia where that's coming up, it's going to be a big factor. So I guess, my idea is that while we're here in these seats, we do the right thing. And that's what I think, that it's entrusted to us to do the right thing. Not the political right thing, but the right thing for the city of Parksville.
Well, and I appreciate that. And hopefully our residents understand that when you explain the reasons for the decision is that long-term stewardship of the assets, that there's an understanding and an appreciation of that among the electorate. The other part of it, though, is taking that longer term vision of reaching that sustainable level, right? So I'm not suggesting that we have a 10% increase in rates this year, right? So that we get to that. I think we look at what's a realistic kind of runway to get to that point, and council can make some decisions around that with of course a full understanding that there's people that want to have a 0% tax increase and perhaps need a 0% tax increase. So we'll talk a little bit about that on Wednesday as to what I fully understand that council has to balance these different things. But what I do hope is that our residents understand and appreciate that there is a need for this. And you go to other communities that clearly are not having a focus on maintaining their assets, and you go, okay, how long does that last? And you see some of these like the Osoyoos where they have a 40% tax increase, or you have other communities where the roads are just in terrible shape on Vancouver Island, right? Where we don't have a climate that might indicate that. Or it's a community, it's not like Prince Rupert where it's got an important port designation. And so the federal and provincial governments come in and save the day. And so, there's some different unique scenarios like that, but I think all we can do together is to kind of build a program that tries to do that long-term stewardship and funding of that, so that we don't have catastrophic failures of the infrastructure.
Right.
And two, you don't have catastrophic financial decisions that need to be made, right? Whether that's significant tax increases or rate increases. So all we can do is bring you this information, the data, and our best recommendation, and council can weigh that against all of the other priorities that are coming at you as well.
Right. Thank you. I think clear and concise communications are going to be critical to let the electorate know when we're making decisions. This is why, and this is what we're prepared to stand by as being the right thing to do. Yeah, that's great. Thanks. Go ahead, Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You mentioned sort of in passing about a bylaw. Is it possible to put a bylaw in about this fact that we're doing this, why we're doing this? Is that possible, or?
Through the mayor, I guess in theory, it's in the financial plan bylaw, right? Because the financial plan bylaw will include the contributions to reserves and the infrastructure expenditures. And so that's where it would be defined in terms of amounts and approved by council. The other part of what we'll see is bringing council a 20-year and longer financial plans. And that's what the gas tax agreement requires, is to see that long-term financial plan tied to funding a funding program. It doesn't dictate what the funding program needs to be, but those two need to be considered together. And so we want to be able to tick that box when it comes time to renew that agreement.
Thank you. Councillor Grans, go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to our Director of Finance. Thank you so much. So a number of things, but maybe the first question is, if you have any thoughts on the thing I've seen a bit lately is borrowing from reserves, where projects do internal borrowing. And so if we had massive reserves, that would certainly make an increased temptation to borrow from those reserves. So do you have any philosophical insights on that?
Through the mayor, I think it's great to give council the flexibility to do that. So if we're building our own reserves, it gives us the flexibility to borrow from ourselves rather than the MFA or other external bodies, although we're limited in who we can borrow from, if the plans are in place. And what I mean by that is, if we're building an infrastructure renewal reserve that we know we're not going to need 20 million of it for another 60 years, because that's those projects that we've been building towards, then that's a great use of that money. There are some restrictions around making sure we continue to pay interest to ourselves and things like that. There are, some things that need to be put in place. It's good to even have a borrowing bylaw when we're borrowing from ourselves. So making sure that we're ticking all the boxes as though we were borrowing externally. But I think it's a great way for a municipality to become financially sustainable in terms of relying on its own reserves. So assuming those other pieces are in place, no problem with that at all. Yeah.
Carla?
It's not a follow-up, it's a separate question, so I
Go
can
ahead.
maybe,
Go
okay,
ahead.
thank you. A lot of this revolves around this crystal ball that we're trying to put together around what the future cost of these assets will be. I'm wondering to what extent do you factor things like whether the interest rate that we would get would outpace the inflation rate? Because otherwise you're just eroding your buying power. To what extent are we discounting what things may cost in the future based on technological change? And to what extent are we maybe adding a premium based on concerns around maybe concrete gets more expensive down the road, or certain things that, like, certain resources are harder to get down the road? To what extent does that factor into this algorithm of crystal ball that is being put together?
Through the mayor, right now, some of those are factored in. The indexing on both the construction cost and the contribution helps to do some of that in terms of what the future costs might be. But we have not kind of tried to estimate the future cost and discount it back to today's dollars, because we kind of assume the interest is the same as well. So it becomes a circular calculation. I think as we kind of fine tune and have, say, 20-year financial plans, we might do more of that work in terms of really understanding what the cash flows might be. But for these very high level ones, we're not factoring too many of that kind of fine level of detail. It's really at, okay, what do we have now? What are the costs estimated to be? Yeah, so pretty rough numbers right now.
Maybe just one sort of thought is the question on intergenerational equity that you've mentioned a couple times. I think just maybe one thought to throw in there is that you could potentially buy a house and then look to pass that down to your children, but then ask yourself, can they afford to keep up that house? And that's, I think, something to think about as part of this as well. If we get these assets, ideally we're paying for them right away, but then there is a cost to keeping those down the road. So how do we think about that?
Yeah, through the mayor, that's a really great question. Yeah. But
We
I'm
just
not-
go to think.
that I can't answer. It's more, it's one of
That's
the
just
blue
philosophy,
skies,
yeah.
isn't it? Yep. One for our philosopher's hat.
I was just looking for that crystal ball. It's just good. Okay. Councillor Gore, go ahead, sir.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Jetta. Remarkable work. And thank you to Mr. Denton. Thank you for all the work that you've done. And I hope you change your mind before I come back to the city, and I hope to see you again. But just being optimistic. Question for you, Jetta. I know you briefly touched on Prince, was it Prince Rupert? That is,
Yes.
the federal government and the provincial governments step up because it's a port city. But looking at the numbers, on not just on your presentation, but it's out in the news. We are talking about the infrastructure deficit across Canada. So, and specifically about Parksville, when we look at our funding gap of 13 million annually, we know that the province and the feds have to step up. So for us to be looking into those reserves, we will do our part, obviously, and I think we are doing our part. But this battle cannot be fought or won without the senior levels of government doing their part. And I think this council has been very much vocal and advocated previously at UBCM, FCM for the need for that steady funding that we need. I want to know whether the importance of natural assets and how we can utilize those in this equation down the road, especially with so much of uncertainty with the climate changing and the warming and the storms that we see. There's so much unpredictability. There's so much we can predict, but also the benefit that natural assets provide in perhaps in offsetting those future costs. Like especially we talk about the storm drain, so having those bioswales and all that. So I was wondering, natural assets is the new buzzword, but are we also incorporating that into our asset management plan, and especially for the replacements and all those costs that you mentioned? Thank you.
Through the mayor, thank you for that question. A couple of comments on that. One is, I think that with every infrastructure project and all of this planning, our engineering team is looking at, is there a natural asset solution to this? And we're seeing all kinds of really interesting solutions around the province that are often brought to conferences and asset management conferences and our local government management conferences to show where different municipalities have saved very, very significant dollars by using a natural asset solution. I'm reminded of one in Powell River related to storm drainage, where a $750,000 engineered project became $100,000 of something that they ran some water through a forest area and things like that. So there's lots of work to be done on that. I think the first thing for the city is kind of trying to inventory the natural assets we have now, and then continuing to look for those opportunities where, and this is part of refining these renewal report cards, is perhaps instead of renewing that storm drainage infrastructure, it can be replaced with a natural asset solution instead, which changes, again, that refinement of the sustainable funding. So I think that's something that's very much on the minds of staff, looking for those solutions. In the water master plan, it identified some areas, I think within 20 years, where there might be fire flow limitations. And so that needed to be looked at. And I think with climate change, I think what we're seeing on the island is the fire risk. And so making sure we're taking care of that within the city, as well as municipalities around the province thinking about Dawson Creek, where water and drought is a real issue. And so looking for solutions around that. And I think that's why starting with the inventory of what we've got already and making sure that we are maintaining that, and especially when we're using it actively, as well as looking for those other natural asset solutions. Certainly, I would say across the board, whether it's in admin, finance, engineering, in our utilities, our conferences, our PD, everyone's looking at climate change and infrastructure related to that and how we can kind of prepare for that and start thinking with a different lens, right? And not so much build it, but maybe there's a different way that nature's already providing for that. So I think it's a good point, and it's certainly part of that refinement of the renewal assets as we move forward.
Councillor Beal, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through to Jetta. Thank you very, very much for the presentation, although I had read through it, in fact, twice. You going through it really makes it much clearer. I also want to thank Councillor Grenz for his questions about that flexibility. Will there be the possibility to, let's say, borrow from reserves? I can see where something might come up in the short term, and we've got money set aside for a longer term, and I would certainly hope that we can do that. So that sounds very sound. And also finally, the questions from Councillor Gore. Pleased to hear that climate change, those realities are all being considered. And I really was noticing the numbers and these totals that are coming up, you know, whether it be 15 million or 18 million and so on. And I was struck by the comparison with the results of the Toronto Blue Jays Foundation, their 50-50 draw, which was around that amount. But in fact, I just checked it and it was, because the last time I saw it, it was at 18 million for the winner.
Nice.
And no, it's 25 million. So there are people out there who are prepared to pay some money. I don't know if we want to or need to go the route of some kind of a splashy foundation, but
Do any of them live
it-
in Parksville?
yeah. But I was struck by the similarities of those numbers, but thank you again. And I will go back and read it again, and particularly a couple of the graphs that I found a bit challenging.
Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Wood.
Thanks very much, Mayor, and I agree with you that it's more responsible to put money away. I think the easy answer is to do a Ken Sim and say, oh, it's an election year, let's go 0%. And I think voters are smarter than that, and it comes off a little bit cheesy to do what he said he was going to try to do. And I think that might cost him. I think people want mayor and council to be responsible with it. 3 questions, if I might. Jetta, thanks so much for the presentation. Are these estimates, if we had to kind of ask you if they're optimistic, realistic, or pessimistic? And we can go one question at a time, but you know, if you had to lean, I'm guessing that you kind of went pessimistic with these numbers, but maybe you went as realistic as possible. So I thought I'd ask you.
Through the mayor, I'd say that these numbers are very conservative. So
Yeah.
I think they'll be on the high end as
Sure.
we refine. So I wouldn't think we're going to come to a point where it's going to be higher unless the economics just of construction and everything go crazier than they already are. But I think with more information will become more refinement, especially on that roads piece. And so as we kind of observe our own assets and how they age and how long they're lasting in different parts of the community, even we'll be able to refine that. So I would suggest to you that they're conservative and they're probably on the high side.
Thank you. Next question is regarding our index, and I could have looked it up, but I forget what we indexed it to. Did we index to building construction price index, or what did we index these to?
Through the mayor, yes. Yep.
Okay, that's great. And then my final question is with regards to the CCBF. What were Parksville's, I guess, what contributions came to Parksville in the last, I don't know, few years under that banner? What did we apply for? What did we get? Do you have those off the top of your head, even just rough numbers?
Yeah, through the mayor, that one we don't apply for. It
It
just
just
comes.
comes.
So
Mm.
it's been on average about $700,000 per year.
Okay,
So I think within this 10-year time period, it was at about 675. I think by the end of this 5-year financial plan that'll come to you, we're at 721.
okay.
So FCM is proposing that it be doubled. Well, that's significant, you know, and I think one of the recommendations that I may bring to council is, do you tag that to one of those classes, right? Do you say that CCBF program is applicable to everybody? So for example, we're going to call it all water, or we're going to put it to the fire hall and apparatus and provide a funding stream that funds that. That's an option where you could do that, or you could do as council has been doing and kind of where it's needed and it gets kind of pieced across different projects. But if it could be as FCM wanted, doubled with more guarantee around it, it's indexed to inflation, it could provide a funding stream that funds one class of assets that is critical to the city. that's just an example of what you could do. I don't know if other municipalities are doing that, but I'm just saying that is one thing that we could do, or it could just be for water. So it would be great if we had, I mean, this being in the middle of a 10-year agreement is helpful in that we know we at least have it for that, which is another 8 now, I guess, but it is a pretty significant funding stream that council could decide to dedicate to one thing or another. Yeah.
Sure, thank you. And thank you, Mayor, for entertaining multiple questions. I'll speak to a little bit of FCM advocacy days after, later on in the meeting. Thanks.
Right. We look forward to that. Thank you. Any other first-time speakers, questions? Just when we're talking about Jetta regarding borrowing from healthy capital reserves and the advantages to that, borrowing from ourselves, such. I'm wondering though, out of those healthy capital reserves that we have, regarding also the very successful investment income you're getting on those right now, is there a mechanism in place to take that investment return of capital, or is there a dedicated mechanism to take that interest earned and put it into a reserve as such, or is it just go rolling back into the capital reserve fund itself, or do we actually take that? Okay, we earned that this year. Let's take that and put that towards a reserve fund, or are we just rolling it back into the capital reserve under the premise of money makes money, more money makes more money? So I get that, and I understand the advantage of that as well.
Right.
Because looking on the reports, your return is quite healthy, which I'm appreciative for. But I'm wondering what your philosophy is to do with that interest income.
Thank you for that question. Our reserves bylaw requires that the interest earned on the restricted capital reserves is kept in the capital reserve. So that again is a part of that best practice that kind of stays within that fund. So our bylaw does require that. What I'm sad to report is that our returns are not, the interest rates have very significantly gone down this last year, and we'll have some discussion about that on Wednesday. But yeah, we were enjoying, lots of 5% and 4%, and now it's more like 2 and 2.5. So those were good years while they lasted. And so now it's about, as we are accumulating reserves, though, maybe looking at some of those other vehicles that maybe MFA has, or other, some of our investment advisors are bringing, where we can say, can you commit to 5 years or can you commit to 10 years? I've been reluctant to do that until we kind of build out our plan. I wouldn't want to tie up the city's funds when we don't really have, a really good long vision on that. But I feel like we're getting to a point where we could be looking at and making some of those investments. And those, again, are still up in the 4.5 and 5 if you can commit to that time frame. So part of, another benefit of building out these plans is having some surety around that in the cash flow, and then being able to take advantage, further to your point about having money makes more money. Sometimes you can take advantage of those things that others aren't able to get. So we look to our investment advisors on that to bring us those options right now. I haven't gone with too many, just until we kind of build this out a little bit further, including that 20-year plan that we'll bring to council in the spring. And that'll really help to define when we might need some of that cash. So yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. No investments in gold bullion?
None.
That's too bad.
Yeah.
Anyways, very healthy right now. Thank you very much, Jetta. Any other questions for Jetta on this first part of her presentation? No, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you. See you Wednesday.
Sorry?
See you Wednesday.
Aren't you coming back on number 2, or is this? Oh, sorry.
Yep. This report was to kind of address both of those
Okay,
reports.
you got both of them? Okay.
Yeah.
That's good, because I was looking for here and I don't know.
Okay.
So, okay, that's good. So I would like a mover and a seconder for the recommendations as noted. And I'll read it out so we know what we're talking about here. From Ms. Holmes, that the report from the Director of Finance dated October 24, 2025, entitled Infrastructure Report Cards be received. And also that the report from the Director of Finance dated October 24, 2025, entitled Funding Alternatives for Long-Term Infrastructure Renewal be received, and that council defer consideration of funding alternatives to the 2026-2030 financial plan deliberations. Mover seconder for that, moved by Counselor Wood, second by Counselor Grenz. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Thank you. The next report on the agenda is regarding from the Manager of Communications for the Parksville Community Park Mobile Food Services to update council on the pilot project for the staff delivery of mobile food services in the Parksville Community Park. Do we have a presentation today, CAO Kaler, or are we just in the attachments provided? Thank you. Do I have a mover or second for the recommendations as noted? Moved by Counselor Wood, seconded by Counselor Beal. Any discussion on that? Counselor Gore, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I have a question through you to staff. Knowing that previously the pilot was approved by this council on the premise that we will look for other possible operators for this. I know the last year when it happened, we were in a bit of a pinch because we could not find somebody to run this program. So I was wondering if there's any interest either from the PDBA, the Chamber of Commerce, or any other groups who expressed interest in perhaps taking this on. And I have another question following up.
Okay, I'll direct your inquiry to staff, and CAO Kaler can advise if there's been any other opportunities or requests for providing services. Go ahead, CAO Kaler.
Thank you. Oops, through you to council. We certainly had that opportunity discussed in the open meeting, and I think hopefully everybody was aware that that was discussed here. I think one of the challenges that we're seeing with some of the organizations is really their capacity as well. We have not had anybody reach out expressing interest in operating that contract for us. Council could do an RFP, but that's up to them if they would like to do that. We did survey the food truck operators and ask them if any of them were interested, or again, gave that opportunity for feedback on things to improve or change. And it wasn't brought to us that anybody else was willing to or wanting to take that on. There were some benefits as are outlined in the report from our perspective that with staff managing it, we were able to create some synergies with our own other staff. So like if we knew there was an event on a weekend that we thought another food truck might be necessary, we were able to reach out to the group that we had and offer that up. So for those of you that were in the park, you were able to see quite regularly there was another truck on big event days in the gathering space. And so one thing that might be more challenging for another operator was they wouldn't have that information in real time about what events are booked. There was a lot of other synergies too, just in terms of us obviously reaching out to our own internal staff in parks or operations, just to deal with things more quickly without a middle person, but it's completely council's discretion. Our recommendations are outlined in the agenda with the rationale for that, and it's up to you guys if you feel like there's another avenue you'd like to pursue. There's definitely time for that.
Yes. Thank you, CAO Kaler. And I have to admit that I had many comments from the public as well that, well, we have a great selection of food trucks down there as compared to past years. They're very appreciative of that. And plus from the operators themselves, they enjoyed the fact that they were given opportunities to have flexible times that were not necessarily on their schedule. That was due to the forethought of the booking staff. Advising that was coming up. So it proved having flexibility was an asset for both the public as well as the operators themselves. So I was appreciative that they handled that. Councillor Gore, you have a follow-up. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. So through you, I do want to mention that definitely I read the report, and I myself or the council, I doubt we received any negative feedback from the public about the food trucks or how things planned out at the park. But my question is, that looks like we are moving towards organizing events, managing and managing food trucks as a city. So we are taking on this function. So I want to know if I try to do my research, but I could not find anything. Is staff aware other municipalities taking on these functions? Is is this a normal thing? We being a tourist oriented city, I get a little bit different. But on the island, do you see cities getting into such functions, other cities?
Thank
I
you.
see.
If I may, through you.
Director of Communications is also standing up. Do you want to?
Okay, I'll let her
Yeah.
go first then.
Yeah, I
I
just,
can't see her behind me, so.
so for your sake, Councillor Gar, Director of Communications, Deb Tardif will reply to you.
Thank you, Mayor. We did look at almost all municipalities on Vancouver Island, and about 85% of municipalities manage food trucks for their municipality.
That's why I asked Deb. Yeah, thank you for that, Ms. Tardif. Did you hear that response, Councillor Gar? Was that clear?
Yes, thank you. I was glad to hear that.
Okay.
I have
Thank you.
one last question, or I can wait for others to ask their questions.
I
first.
don't see any other hands. Okay, well, I do. Sorry. Okay, we'll come back to you, Councillor Gore. First time questions. Go ahead, Councillor Martin.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I have a comment. I was at the Pumpkin Smash on Saturday, which was quite an event at Memorial. And there was a fellow I met there that has a food truck. So we were chatting about it. And I said, "You do well?" And he says, "Yeah, I've been doing this." And now he's got it all figured out. I think it's 9 years or 12 years. He's been doing it a long time. And he says he finds it very good how everything's working and for him in a business. So I thought it would be good to, someone who's been doing it for a while, knows what he's doing, and he's successful. So I'm glad to hear that. So,
Thank
and
you.
it would help with what we're doing in the city. He didn't complain about anything.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Grants.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I have no doubt that the staff did an excellent job at this, and that's what we've seen for sure. I would love to hear from staff though, in terms of this being a pilot, and we're looking at renewing this now. I assume, is it going to be a continuation of the pilot, or just kind of an ongoing thing moving forward? Or would this come back to council after a year again? And what are the metrics of success for knowing whether the pilot was successful from the staff's perspective?
For a continuation of service instead of a pilot, because that's what I'm hearing, Councillor Grants. Yeah. CEO Kaler.
Thank you. Through you to Councillor Grenz and the rest of council. I think what we found was that the level of work was probably less even than having a contracted position do the work for us. Even if it is contracted out, we still have to do the RFP, we have to do the selection, then we are dealing with a middle person quite often. And then we also have, I would say, some challenges perhaps on the live communication. As I think most of you know, our special event coordinator has worked with the city for decades and used to work in the operations side of things. So has a tremendous intuition around what might be needed, what could happen, who she should talk to. Like it's quite amazing to watch. So I think from my perspective, I have seen efficiencies and less time than in previous years where we have been less in control, I would suggest. It is something that we are seeking direction from council now to continue on an ongoing basis. We do typically bring things back to council, obviously, throughout the years, but we weren't really suggesting an end date on this one. A future council could also ask us for some different direction, but our recommendation right now is really that for the foreseeable future, this be a staff-led process. There will be some discussions, I think, in the future about service levels in terms of other, like managing food trucks elsewhere. Like right now, it's limited to the community park, limited to seasonal, really tied with special events. If council wanted to see something different, like food trucks in other locations or, throughout the shoulder season, then we would certainly need more direction from council to do that. But from my perspective, I had 0 calls, which is a really good sign. Although I like getting calls, but the ones I get tend to be not very positive. And I'm in the park a lot, and I didn't have complaints or hear complaints or overhear anyone, which in previous years, I never wore my City of Parksville sweater to the park because I didn't want people to come up and start talking to me about things. So I think it went very well. And I think that staff are quite well set up to continue it without any real change in our workload, just because we have to do the work in some ways either way. So our recommendation would be that we just continue it until told otherwise. But if council wants to put in a formal date for renewal or coming back, we can certainly do that as well.
You recognize that in the past, we had a outside service provider that took their management fee off that. And so that's not being paid out to, that's being received by the city of Parksville, which helps offset that staff members' dedication wages and so forth. So, which is a good thing, which we were doing anyways, as I say, because we had to put out the RFPs on it. So it's eliminating that extra level of management fees going out. Anyways, a follow-up, Councillor Chris, go ahead.
Thank you. No, I think that's good. I think maybe it wasn't clear to me in the report that there wasn't like a financial statement or something about this in there. So, but it seems to me that it's at least revenue neutral, if not better. So that seems like a good way to go to me, especially if we're making fewer other headaches come up.
Great. Thank you. Any other first-time speakers? No. Councillor Gore, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. So I do see that the request from staff is to have this on an ongoing basis. I wonder what the CAO's take is on if we were to look at this as an ongoing basis, do they anticipate any additional staff time or resources needed to support this request in the future? Let's say in the next, up to the next financial plan, 5 years?
CAO Kaler, if you would, please.
Thank you. Through you to council. Not if the scale and service level stays the same. So I mentioned if council wanted to broaden this out to have it be looking at year round or looking at other areas, like if we wanted to be adding regular food trucks to Springwood or something, for example, then we would have to look at that. But the way it's currently being delivered, like I mentioned previously, it's very similar amount of work that we were expending working with another person. So we're just really doing that work ourselves rather than the same work we would have been doing with somebody else. So I think we've found some of those synergies have been less work. Like, for example, even trying to chase people down, like we know who's paid their fees and who's got their business licenses. Like we can check all of that ourselves internally much quicker than having another person try to follow up with all those people and get us the information. So we are seeing efficiencies with it. My only caution would be it's for the service level we have right now on the food truck pads we have right now in the community park with the timeframes we have right now. So changes to that would need to be looked at in terms of what the impacts could be.
So I have one more follow-up, Mr. Mayor.
Go ahead, sir.
Yes, thank you. In terms of expenses, CEO Kaler, I think the figure that I saw was $5,000 in the report. Can you confirm if that includes the expenses with the hydro and the water usage in the park? And second, would these pad rental fees be indexed, or are we looking at revising them, or how do we calculate those fees?
If I may, through council, the first part is on the 5,000, that is just our direct costs for supporting that service with litter pickup, which we do regardless of whether we're the contract manager or not. It doesn't include a discrete amount for it's not metered and applied to each person how much water and electricity they use, but that's built into the fee. So the pad rental is created to kind of cover those costs. So we get revenue from I think, what is the amount here in the report? That revenue that we get from each of the pad rentals is intended to cover those costs.
Thank you. Any other, go ahead, Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So we're only involved with the food trucks going to Community Park, because my question is, I know there's a food truck often at the events at the museum. That's nothing to do with the city then. Okay, is that one?
Go
If I
ahead,
may.
CAO Kaler.
Through you again to council. So we book the operators in the community park directly. Hosts of special events are responsible for booking their own food trucks. So if you have an event at the museum and you wish to have a food truck there, then you have to stipulate that on your application. And then it's up to the organizer to choose and pay them and work with them directly. Yeah.
Good. See no hands up. Do I have recommendations? Sorry, I skipped a page here. Do I move in a second or further recommendations? That's already been moved. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Thank you. The next report on the agenda is regarding from the CAO, the Council Code of Conduct for 2025. Legislative requirement to reconsider council's decision not to amend its code of conduct according to Community Charter Section 113. I move or second for further recommendations to receive this report. Moved by Councillor Grens, seconded by Councillor Martin. Thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor? Oh, sorry, do you have your hand up or are you just? I thought you're pointing.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not going to say the same thing I said last year on this, but I will say again that it would be great if the province maybe set up some kind of ombudsperson or something that would deal with this. And so just my annual mention of that.
I do not disagree. Thank you. All those in favor? Thank you. That carries. Yes. And the second part about confirming? Yes. So council at this particular time, because this is a legislative requirement, should count, we have the opportunity to confirm the code of conduct for the city of Parksville. The council, upon reconsideration of its policy number 2.23, council code of conduct in accordance with section 113.2 of the community charter, confirms that 2009 code of conduct meets the prescribed principles for codes of conduct and complies with the prescribed legislative requirements. I have a move and a seconder for that. That is moved by Councillor Wood, seconded by Councillor Martin. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Thank you. So we've confirmed our legislative requirements. Thank you. Moving on to bylaws. Final adoption for fees and changes amendment bylaw 2025 number 1515.7. An amendment to include electric vehicle charging fees as well as the option for development applications to pay the cost of alternative delivery for providing notice in the event of a public mail service disruption. Moved or seconded for the recommendation? Moved by Councillor Wood, seconded by Councillor Grens. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Thank you. That carries. Are there any notices of motion perhaps from Councillor Grens? Just.
Thank you. Notice of motion to discuss the PCCS request for a liaison from council.
Seconded by Councillor Wood. Oh, no, sorry, I was just seconding. We're not even there yet. This is just a notice of motion. I was getting all excited here. I was just gonna get on with it, but yeah, we'll save it for the next meeting. Okay, that's fine. Thank you for that notice of motion, Councillor Grens. Under new business, the one I have listed is we have new business from Councillor Gore regarding federal bail reforms. Councillor Gore, go ahead, sir.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I wasn't sure what part of the agenda this should fall under, but it's mostly just like a debrief to yourself and the council. And I was grateful for the opportunity to be able to attend the technical briefing by the Federal Department of Justice on October 24th, when they presented the Bill C-14, kind of brief regarding the Bail and the Sentencing Reform Act that the federal government is looking at. So, as you're aware, most of these concerns arise from the repeat offenders that we see, and the federal government is looking at reforming the criminal code. The focus is on violent crimes, and especially, I think, focusing on Ontario. They're also looking at auto thefts and copper thefts, unprovoked violence. That's been a big issue even on our streets. So the biggest change, what the government is proposing, is to have a reverse onus on the people who are accused to prove that they will not be any more danger to the public if they're given the bail. So what they're trying to address is the catch and release that we see, and a lot of people complain about, is the issue that they're looking at. At the same time, what they are also looking at is imposing some firearms and weapons prohibitions in more. It gives more authority to the courts to do that, and even more stricter conditions of release in certain cases that the courts will be allowed to do. So again, it reinforces that somebody will be detained by ensuring that the accused people, they have to demonstrate the adequacy of their release, why they should be released from custody. At the same time, they will be required that the court has to determine if the denial of the bail is needed so that the public confidence in the justice system is maintained, and the public safety is at the heart of this. The big thing that came out of this, there's a lot of law jargon in this, but the biggest thing is what the government is trying to address is the fear that the public has about the safety of our streets and what's going on. In terms of sentencing, they're also proposing some reforms to the criminal code, where they're expanding the consecutive sentencing provisions and conditional sentence orders, like some people who were given house arrest, they will be restricted for certain sexual offenses, including child sexual offenses and those sort of things. The other thing is they are going to make some changes to the Youth Criminal Justice Act. So the biggest difference will be that now the police will be allowed to publish the identity of a youth if there is an urgent situation. Let's say there's public safety at risk. They don't have to go to the court to seek an order to release the identity of a youth. Similarly, like there's some corresponding changes that are being proposed to the NDA that applies to the military folks. The good part of the discussion was that the federal government realizes the importance of consulting the provinces and the local governments on this. That's why this technical briefing was held. So that was really refreshing to hear. A good point was brought up during the discussions was a large number of Indigenous folks who are represented in our justice system, and perhaps the government will look at expanding the restorative justice system. This was one of the feedbacks that was provided. So there's more to follow on this. It was just a preliminary information session that was held, but the government is listening. And like I said, they are looking forward to working collaboratively with the provinces and the local governments how to address this issue going forward. One concern I personally have, like with these changes, I'm not sure how this is going to affect our staff capacity at the RCMP. If people are being asked to stay in police custody, let's say over the weekend or longer time to wait for the court dates and stuff. So those are some we have to see the cost implications for us as the biggest payer of the bill for the policing. So, but there's no funding attached to this bill that was discussed, and so some things to consider for us. That's all I have.
Thank you. And Councillor Wood, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Gore. It was really important that the feds stepped up on this. Local governments, the provinces, premiers, attorneys general have been screaming for bail reform for a long time, so it's good news. As we see in many issues, there's finger pointing all over the place. Now that the feds seem to have stepped up with most of these items, it's time for the province to step up. And they need to step up on sheriff staffing. They need to step up on Crown and Duty Council resources. They have to step on judicial capacity. They have to step up on supervision and victim services. They have to step up on data and dashboard where they can share that information with BC through to other provinces so that there's information tracking for people who offend in Alberta, and then maybe they come to BC and there isn't information sharing. And then BC has to invest in remote and tech infrastructure for that same sort of kind of back-end information sharing. And so it's time for BC to invest in all of that infrastructure to support the RCMP on the ground so that there's resources to get that process, keep the process rolling along. So that's just from my understanding, I really would ask the province to start investing, and they can't point to the feds anymore, especially that with that reverse onus. And so hopefully BC steps forward. Thanks.
Yes, thanks for that. We've all been watching this proceed very slowly through all its different motions, and it's taken on a bit of a different curve as for what Councillor Wood has said regarding addressing responsibility for all these reforms. And so I believe that that's a conversation that's ongoing. All of these are just proposals so far. They have not been adopted. That was been described here today. So just let you know that this is a evolving ball that we have going in. So I appreciate that. Thank you. Any further new business not identified? Go ahead, Councillor Grant.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd just like to put forward a motion to forward to the financial plan discussions, funding, maybe a little bucket for upcoming World Cup events. So maybe, I don't know how to frame this, but some quick background on this is that there is something afoot with some volunteers in the community to have some supporting events around soccer and the activities happening around North America for the biggest game of the world, the beautiful game. And so there may be a role for the city to play in that. I'm not quite sure where that will go yet, but since we have financial plan
I
discussions
would like to
coming up.
raise a point of order, Mayor. Like, how does this request fit into what's beyond the floor? What we're discussing on the floor?
Oh, this is a new business item.
We're still under new business, Councillor Gore. We've just had a request from the Tourism Ministry, and Councillor Grenz is the liaison for the tourism. So he's just bringing this up under new business as to a possibility that the city of Parksville may be interested in.
Okay.
Correct. Yeah. So yeah, I'm not quite sure the appropriate format, but because we just had the Tourism Association meeting a few days ago. And I'd like to kind of forward this on to the discussion when we have our financial plan discussions, to just kind of earmark this idea so that it can come up for discussion in that. We don't need to discuss it today, but just that there's a placeholder when those financial plan discussions come up to touch on this topic. That's my request.
Yeah, and I get totally. I understand if it was going to be any commitment by the city of Parksville to do it. My initial comments are just basically that this should be like a user group, like the soccer, or as they call themselves now, the Football Association. Where they would be bringing this forward. We talked about a few possible options for a big screen set up somewhere. I had requests actually during the Blue Jays run as well for the same thing, and I suggested that if any organization like the Baseball Association wanted to come forth to the city and check into booking venues, that they had the contact information to do. I would think that as far as a financial contribution by the city of Parksville, I'm a little reluctant with that for what is the benefit of our electorate anyways on this. But I think it's worthy of having a conversation so that we can perhaps direct the Tourism Association and possibly the Oceanside Football Association as well to look at something like this, and as we discussed, and maybe explain to them possible venues that they could do. I understand it's the event is happening in June 26th. If June 26th, I believe it is.
Yeah, June and July.
Yeah, June and July 26th. And so we have a little bit of time on this, but if they want to have a venue, they should be booking into it now, because that is coming into our prime season, of course, for our venues being booked out. So I think it's okay that we have it earmarked as a placeholder in the financial discussion, and then we can just discuss what the merits are for to be included in our financial plan or not to be. Staff have taken note, I'm sure. Have we not, staff? Thank you. Staff have that intention. So thanks for bringing that up, Councillor Grant. Councillor Gore.
Yes, thank you. I think it's a great idea that what the councillor is proposing. And I would really love to see even.
Yeah, thank
in
you, Councillor
addition-
Grant. Thank you, Councillor Grant. This is not time for discussion on that now, okay? Yeah,
Sorry, I'm
Councillor Gore. Yeah, so we'll all have our discussions during the placeholder we
Okay.
just put in the financial. This is just a notice of a placeholder. Thank you. Great. Any further new business? Seeing none. Let's go to liaison reports. Liaison reports coming up first is Councillor Beal. Go ahead and just start us off.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, starting off with the Vancouver Island Regional Library. As many people here know, libraries are more than books, whether they be digital and otherwise. They have board games and knitting groups and puzzles, but also something new now, or relatively new, is that the regional library also has radon detector kits. So if there are 15 total for across the regional library, but this is something that patrons can now borrow from the library. I did learn that there are 40 on hold right now. So 40 people are on the wait list. If you do borrow one, you have it for 3 weeks because there is a period of time that's needed in order for the device to work and pick up the measurement as to the levels of radon if there are any present. This is only from October, just now, we're in November, but until the end of April, because it is important that this device is used during the winter months when people are heating their homes, the windows are more often closed. It's less effective in terms of detecting the radon gas in the summertime. Now, some people will say, and I think it is true, that generally Vancouver Island does not have as much of prevalence of radon gas, certainly not like the interior or the Kootenay region, for instance, but it can vary depending on areas, even within a larger area. So I thought that would be of interest to people. And if people have high concern, you can have a look and see how long the wait will be. So if they have high concern, it also may be possible to explore some other avenues for getting a hold of something like this. So I thought that was worth sharing with people. Also, there are some patrons who are having some challenges with the website. The website is fairly new. There's been some big changes, let's say, with the website, and change can be an adjustment and it can be challenging. So just to reassure people who are having a bit of difficulty navigating the website that, first of all, well, actually a good tip is that somewhere on that main screen is Basic Catalog. And if you click on Basic Catalog, it will give you a stripped down version of what is available. And it's much closer to the older version. And so it might be easier to find what you're after. But barring that, certainly one can come into our branch or any branch that you're at, and staff will be very happy to help people. If they've got time, they'll spend time with you right then. And if it's something more involved, it's possible to book an appointment, for half an hour or whatever is needed in order to really help people figure out the issues and fix those problems. So that's all. Actually, I will say finally, and I think I shared this before, but the library is also working on advocacy for libraries, public libraries, and has put together a little an advocacy program explaining what libraries can and do called A Library Lights the Way. And it's also working with other public libraries to continue the work on advocacy and education and the importance and role that public libraries can play for all of our residents and help equalize opportunity. Okay, I'll move
Carry on.
along.
Carry
Any
on.
questions? Nope. All right. Also, speaking about the Early Learning and Childcare Council of Oceanside, I think I mentioned previously that the group was able to access a Spark grant to dig into the situation here locally with regards to providing childcare and underscoring as well that childcare means good quality education components. It's more than babysitting, certainly more than daycare, it's childcare. And as a follow-up, there will be a conversation open to other childcare providers in the area, and I will also be attending, and that's going to be held tomorrow right here next door at the Jensen Center. So that will be a follow-up, looking at the challenges, the strengths, the obstacles, whether it be staffing, the role of government, challenges for small operators to deal with all the government reporting that's needed in order to access grants and subsidies. So there's a lot to cover there, and it's really important. And you know, for those of us who may not have young children at home, it really is important for our local economy, for the economy of individual families. When they cannot access quality childcare, then that means fewer opportunities for working and for productivity. Moving along. Okay, and finally, I will mention École Bolinas Secondary School, just to say that I did have a lovely meeting recently with the vice principal. And we talked about a number of things, including the different programs that are going on at the school, and in particular clubs such as the Interact Club or the Model UN, and some other clubs, Student Voice, another group there. And that's very involved with, let's see, large issues that impact the school community and the community beyond. So we're going to have another meeting in the fairly near future, I hope, to go a little further with this and see what opportunities might be there for students involved and interested in larger community issues.
Thank you for those, Councillor Beal. Councillor Martin, you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. For the Parksville Historical Society, it's kind of rewarding to see what's happening there. This event on the 24th of November, Jane Seabury, she's been given an award and all sorts of recognition. It's already sold out, November 24th. So I thought that was interesting. Also, what is really good is that there's local things happening for Christmas. And I think that it's right here, and we don't have to go drive far away to see all this. And they're having this 3 times. It's called A Child's Christmas in Wales. And it's on November 30th at 2 p.m., December 4th at 7 p.m., and December 5th at 7 p.m. It's a 1-hour event. And I just want to read this to you what it is, because I think it kind of points out what's going on here, which is really special. It's a holiday classic blending story, memory, myth, and music, performed by a veteran actor, Michael Armstrong, with traditional Celtic carols sung by Jennifer Kelly and harp accompaniment by Mary-Ellen Martin. This 45 to 50-minute performance offers audiences a journey of joy, nostalgia, humor, and reflection. Guests are even invited to join in on the Welsh caroling Christmas. It's $25. Order your tickets online. I think it just makes it so special to have it right here in Parksville. So they're doing that at the museum, and the other things that have been well received that they've been doing this year. They've got this full-time person who's been hired, who's done many jobs over the years in this field, and she's very creative, and that's, I think, made the difference from, you know, they're closed on Tuesday and Wednesday, so they're open all winter from 12 to 4. So I think that's significant for, you know, it's a city property, but it's also historical. So this is special. So anyone have any questions or anything? No?
Councillor Beal, go ahead.
Thank you, Councillor, Mr. Mayor, and through to Councillor Martin. So now being open throughout the winter, I'm just thinking out loud here that perhaps that might provide slightly easier access for school classes to perhaps take part. I think in the past it's tended to be open closer to the summertime and then through the summer and the schools are closed at that time. So I think that'll be a great opportunity if in fact there are some programs that would be a good match with the school curriculum.
There has been too, recently a visit, I just heard about it in passing that, some comments from the kids and that they liked the classroom there. They were sitting at the desk and all this, these little kids, right? And so, yes, I think it does, and how it was, yeah, so good. The other thing is the PDBA, Parksville Downtown Business Association. Their board is really active. I mean, the museum and the board there are very involved. They're working towards a vibrant downtown, and we'll be lighting the town up for the holiday season, late November. And they're also doing, we do association with them 27th of November with the board and the council that's coming up. So meeting in the city's hosting this time. Both these places are great Christmas shopping. Just remember, everything we do, we can spend our money here in our backyard for all the businesses. And the museum also has Christmas shopping. And I just think it's important to remember that being in our local economy. And they're dedicated business people that are running their businesses and wanting to be successful. So we can certainly embrace that. So I just thought I'd pass that on for Christmas. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wood, you're up next.
Thank you so much, Mayor. I'll keep it quick. We listened to our Director of Finance and we talked about the Canada Community Building Fund today. I'm just back from Ottawa and I think there were 100 meetings with MPs and senators spread throughout a few days, and all of them are asking for the federal government to permanently double the CCBF. And so here in Parksville, as we heard earlier in the meeting, it adds up to about $700,000 each year for Parksville. And if it were permanently doubled, which they've doubled it in the past, but we are asking for it to be permanently doubled, and that would be 1.4 million that we could reliably depend on as we plan for asset management and other things. On the efficiency side of managing that fund, I believe there's 4 staff in Ottawa that manage that fund once it's released. And so 4 staff is very low and efficient, flows out to the provinces, and then here in BC, UBCM disperses it kind of on a per capita basis to the city of Parksville. So the budget comes out tomorrow. I am not going to, be too excited about it not happening. I'm guessing it's not in there, but we'll see. But that doesn't mean that we don't keep advocating for it. Coming from Parksville, I talked about our French Creek Pollution Control Center. The feds kind of put in 11 million bucks. The province put in about 8. And that project is going to come in at, right now about $140 million. And so, if the feds and the provinces want us to keep building homes, we're going to have to see a little bit of money kicked our way, because if we don't see that, then we're going to be taxing the homes to pay for the infrastructure while we chase home affordability. So that was the message that we had over 100 meetings. I personally had, I think, 6 meetings of those 100. And that was local governments across the entire country being a voice for local governments and trying to get that federal funding flow to the local governments so that we don't have to keep increasing those property taxes for the infrastructure that we need. That's all I had. Thanks,
Great.
Mayor.
No, thank you for that, Councillor Wood. And I agree. And hearing maybe a slight bit of frustration to the fact that this always reminds me of, we just end up being that dog chasing its own tail, because the higher levels of government have stressed that we need more development, we need more housing. And they said, yes, and when you need that infrastructure to support that, we're going to be there for you. And then as just regarding the French Creek Pollution Control Center, they were not there for us at all. It didn't even come close to a decent percentage, either one of them. And so we once again, it just gets downloaded to us as we're just as chasing that old tail again because that money is just never forthcoming. But, you know, we just keep on running around in circles, given all the development that we have in the city, and with the expectation that there's going to be some relief from the federal or provincial government, and it hasn't been forthcoming. That's not encouraging. However, being the eternal optimist that I am, we're looking forward to a new budget coming out from the federal government in tomorrow, whether it gets passed or not. And then we'll see what happens after that. And we'll see if we can quit chasing our tail and actually come up with a dog bone. But thank you for your report on the FCM. Council, do I have a mover or seconder for the recommendation at this time that pursuant to section 91 D, E, and K of the Community Charter, council proceed to a closed meeting to consider items relating to the security of the property of the municipality, the acquisition, disposition, or expropriation of land or improvements, and negotiations and related discussions respecting the proposed provision of a municipal service. A mover or seconder for that. Moved by Councillor Wood, second by Councillor Martin. Any discussion? All those in favor? That passed. We are in closed